This is BBC World News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. Our top stories. Hundreds of thousands of Hong Kong protesters braved the rain to call for democratic reforms. So far, it's been largely peaceful.
There are many more people prepared to participate if it is peaceful, and that's what they've tried to achieve this weekend.
Islamic State says it carried out the Afghan wedding bombing that killed 63 people. The 700-year-old glacier that's disappeared in Iceland, a ceremony will be held to commemorate the loss. And in cricket, England and Ben Stokes try and force a victory in the second Ashes Test against Australia. Hello, welcome to BBC News. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets of Hong Kong again, renewing their calls for democratic reforms following months of unrest. The demonstrators braved heavy rain to gather in Victoria Park. Although permission to march was not granted by the authorities, the size of the crowds meant that activists spilled out into the surrounding streets, but there have been no reports of violence. Stephen McDonnell is following the protests on the streets of Hong Kong.
Many of them haven't been able to get anywhere near today's rally just by virtue of the numbers. So Victoria Park was filled despite this driving heavy rain. All of the roads around the park were filled. People were forced then to sort of settle for being in other parts of the city. Now the park is kind of almost emptied once, and now it's filling back up all over again. So here they are, they've been in other parts of the city, and they're marching through here to fill up the park yet again. And it just shows you the level of support still for this movement, especially when it's a legal rally. Now, while there are people all over the streets, these streets have been blocked for hours, it's not really because it was planned that way, it's just too many people. Like I say, that park alone can fill 100,000 people, and we saw just from blocks and blocks, traffic blocked away, and the roads have been filled with demonstrators. There was a big push on this weekend to try and make this a much more peaceful weekend, and that's by and large what it's been. There was one standoff outside a police station last night, but there wasn't too much. And so, there are many more people prepared to participate if it is peaceful, and that's what they've tried to achieve this weekend, to try and garner more public support for this push for democratic reforms, especially after we've seen those shocking images of violence at the airport when a police officer was bashed with his own truncheon, had to pull out a pistol to force people back. We've seen running street battles between riot police and protesters. None of that though today, just lots and lots of people in the streets. And again, because it's been legal, we've had all walks of life attending here. We've had little children, we've had elderly people participating, whole families have come along, and the whole of the city has been caught up in this today. Underground train stations had to shut down. They were just jammed with people trying to reach the rally point. And some of the roads are now still blocked because people are having to take up the roads to walk out of here once they've gone and participated at the rally, and then they move. And then this is kind of like the second shift, if you like, has come through again. They're filling up the park once more.
Stephen McDonnell in Hong Kong. Well, to Afghanistan now, where the Islamic State group has said it carried out a bomb attack at a wedding on Saturday. 63 people were killed and nearly 200 others were injured in the suicide bombing in the capital, Kabul. The Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, has condemned the attack and called a special security meeting. Richard Forrest reports.
This is the aftermath inside the wedding hall. It had been packed with people celebrating a marriage in a minority Shiite neighbourhood in the west of the city. Eyewitnesses said the bomber detonated his device in the men's reception area.
I was in the kitchen and was coming to the hall when I heard the huge sound. My ears couldn't hear anything, and there were lots of injured people. Everybody was running away. Several of our waiters were killed or injured.
Most of the victims were men or boys, the injured taken to hospitals across the city. There were so many, they were crowded into corridors, people rushing to the hospital trying to find missing relatives.
I was in the wedding party when a blast occurred. It was very powerful and the situation was terrible. I saw many children and people hurt.
These wedding halls have become big business in Kabul as the Afghan economy slowly picks up and families spend more on celebrations. But they are seen as soft targets. Last November, at least 40 people were killed at a wedding in Kabul. The attack came as the Taliban and the United States are trying to negotiate an agreement on the withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan in exchange for a Taliban commitment on security and peace talks with the US-backed government. Richard Forrest, BBC News.
Our correspondent Shoaib Sharifi is in Kabul now, and so the Islamic State have claimed responsibility for this. Why would they attack this wedding?
Well, in the last 2 years, the group have had attacks against big gatherings of the Shia community, mostly who are populated in west of Kabul here. But this is the first time. In the past, it were training centers, sports stadium, and this was the first time, in fact, in an actual wedding party. The attack happened. As they said in the statement, their motive was to target the Shia, and this wedding party was of a Shia family, and the area is mostly populated by the Shia minority community in Kabul.
And we're just struggling with the line a little, but we can still hear you. We will have heard a lot over the last couple of weeks about peace talks between the Taliban and the United States, and yet we keep hearing about violence in Afghanistan itself.
Yes, indeed. Particularly in the last couple of days, news from Doha, where Taliban's political offices and also from Washington indicating some tangible progress and just about to reach some sort of an agreement to end the 18-year long conflict in Afghanistan. But this explosion really shocked the residents here, who were some sort of hopeful that there may be some sort of a reduction in violence with this deal with the Taliban. But this is indicating the conflict is far more complicated, and there are other groups, particularly the one like Daesh, that even in the capital Kabul, they have sleeping cells, and they attack as and when and wherever they want. But the attack overall, in fact, tonight was meant to be the very festive night. It's the eve of the Afghan independence 100th anniversary. A lot of preparations were going on for the last 10-20 days, but the attack really literally silenced the city. Kabul citizens were shocked because this type of attack, an attack inside a wedding party of this scale, was unprecedented, indicating literally there's nowhere that you could be safe. It's no more of the issue of being in the wrong time, wrong place. Literally anywhere is insecure, and it's not just the Taliban that are deemed to be the main threat towards the country.
OK, Shoaib Sharifi in Kabul, thank you. Let's look at some of the day's other news. Gibraltar has rejected a request by the United States to once again seize an Iranian oil tanker that had been held since July. The vessel was suspected of transporting oil to Syria. The tanker is still moored off Gibraltar, but Iran says it's expected to set sail later today. Argentina's economy minister, Nicolás Duchovny, has resigned after a week of economic turbulence in the country. His departure follows the government's defeat in primary presidential elections. The Argentinian peso shed 20% of its value against the US dollar after President Macri suffered electoral losses last week. Spain's offered to take in a vessel with more than 100 migrants on board. It's been stranded off the Italian coast for more than 2 weeks. Criticising Italy for not doing more to help, the Spanish government says it would make preparations to receive the vessel. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will tell EU leaders there needs to be a new Brexit deal when he makes his first trip abroad as PM later this week. It comes as a Sunday newspaper has printed leaked government documents warning of food, medicine and fuel shortages in a no-deal scenario. Our political correspondent Mark Lobel reports.
Boris Johnson has been getting his message out on law and order, the NHS and no-deal preparations. This week he'll enter the international stage, meeting Europe's top 2 power brokers, but without a deal in sight. He wants them to know Parliament won't stop Brexit, and this weekend again warned MPs from doing that, writing, "The so-called efforts to prevent no deal are in fact making no deal more likely." But today's Sunday Times leak of classified government documents showing their contingency plans for a no deal make for painful reading. A risk the country should not be taking, according to a former head of the civil service who now advises Labour and has called for a second Brexit referendum.
Part of serving the government of the day is to give them honest advice of the risks. In my personal view,